So I would just like you to tell me about your first contact with Lawrence Hills of the Henry Doubleday Research Association and please tell me about your contact with him in the early days.
Well, I was born in 1953, and in 1968, as a young 15-year-old, I started my first organic garden at home, and I joined the Organic Soil Association of South Africa, and I bought Lawrence Hill's book, Grow Your Own Fruit and Vegetables. And at that point, I think he had visited South Africa recently, and I wrote to him and said, look, I'm keen on organic gardening, and I would really like to know more about what you're doing with comfrey and why you think it's so important. And he encouraged me at that stage. He wrote back to me and said, it's really important that young people like you get involved in organic agriculture, and you should be getting involved in organic research. And I had planted comfrey all over our home. My mother was a little bit concerned about whether this comfrey was something that could be smoked or eaten, but in the end, I think she decided it wasn't bad stuff. And I do remember early on having a boil on my cheek, and saying, "What does Lawrence Hill say about this?" And he said, "Oh, you must dig up the root." Smashed it up with a hammer under some cloth, put some honey in with it, slapped it on the cheek, and left it for a week and took it away, and the boil was completely gone. So I was definitely a convert at that point. And I did some very minor trials, just comparing two different types of comfrey and looking at effects of compost. But it was in my psyche at that stage, because I'd also written to Robert Rodale, and I'd also been to see Bo Peterson. That was later, 1976, when he'd done his research at Uppsala, and I looked at his first trials. And it was my dream as a youngster to go and do some long-term trials. And I always had in the back of my mind that Lawrence Hill said you should do research, and that this is important that we build up research results. And so I went and did my apprenticeship as a biodynamic farmer, 73 to 76 in Australia, came back, ran a couple of farms, became managing director of a farm, bought my own farm, had 20 years of farming, then set up my training foundation, the Raymond Landcare Foundation, spent 20 years training farmers, and then I became a professor at Nelson Mandela University, and finally got to do my comparative trials, which have just finished their fourth year and will be a big part of this book, showing that you can close the yield gap. The first year we had 20% less yield from organic. The second year we had 30% less because we hadn't effectively dealt with the lack of phosphate in the soil. We put rock phosphate in, and the third year the organic out-yielded the conventional, but under very dry circumstances. And in a dry season, as the Americans show, organic often does out-yield conventional. The fourth year, the wetter season, the conventional slightly out-yielded the organic. But we certainly have closed the yield gap, and the fact that I'm doing this organic research is in no small measure due to the stimulation and encouragement of Lawrence Hills, to a young fellow who was growing his first organic garden, and who really responded to the passion of this quirky Englishman who was prepared to take the trouble to respond to a letter and to say, you really need to do some research on organic agriculture if you want to establish it in your country. And so 48 years later, I say thank you, Lawrence Hills, and it's lovely to be here at Ryton Gardens finally and experience what he set up.
So according to our figures, Lawrence did his tour of South Africa in 1967, and I think a couple of years later, according to our records, there were 241 experimenters in South Africa alone. So you probably were one of those experimenters.
I quite probably were. I know that the ladies of the Organic Soil Association were all growing comfrey, and I must say, I think I came in the tail end of that initiative, and it was the done thing to grow comfrey in one's garden. And there also was the subtext that there should be some experiments going on, and farmers should do experiments. And so, in fact, as an organic farmer, I did a lot of farming systems experiments, and I then became the African representative of the International Farming Systems Research and Extension Association. And this idea that it needed to be farmer-centered research and participatory approaches to rural development has stayed with me my whole professional life, and we have certainly built it into all of the work that we've done, that you will not get agricultural stability and food sovereignty if you don't use participatory action research and if you don't build capacity and build institutions at a local level. So I think that went in very well with the organic message that you really need to empower people to feed themselves and to look after Mother Earth while they're doing it.